Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Oh, thank you. Good morning. I'm Ross Sandler. I welcome you to New York Law School. This is the 133rd of these City Law breakfasts, and we're honored to have our regular sponsors, the law firm of Greenberg Traurig, Consolidated Edison, Verizon, and our Gold Star members who voluntarily contribute to the breakfast. We also want to particularly thank the special sponsors for this breakfast, the law firm of Castellanos and Fink and the company of Guideposts, and we'll hear from them later. But I want to welcome you all and bring to the podium, as we always do to begin, our President and Dean, Anthony Crowell.
Thanks so much, Ross, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to New York Law School. I want to certainly thank Ross for another stellar lineup of speakers this year, our year that we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Center for New York City Law, and certainly, as many of you know, the 125th anniversary of New York Law School. And perhaps none of our guests are more stellar or have a more impactful position than today's guest speaker, Robert Capers, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Indeed, his career as a public servant, working in leadership roles for many years in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and before that as an ADA in Manhattan and the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office. He now leads an office that has a very distinguished history, filled with the best legal minds and the most forceful legal advocates, and certainly some of the nation's most prominent public service leaders have led that office, including our U.S. Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. The U.S. Attorney's Office, one can effectively argue, is the tip of the spear of the nation's efforts to achieve justice on behalf of its people. And the breadth of what U.S. Attorney Capers has prosecuted is immense. In just the last month, his office has successfully prosecuted or received plea deals in cases that include organized crime, the FIFA soccer scandal, large street gangs, murder of a U.S. diplomat, political corruption, and the return to Mongolia of fossilized remains of 6 species of dinosaurs. It's truly remarkable what he and his colleagues do on a daily basis, and again, it's a great honor to have him here at New York's law school, just steps away from the courts, city and state and federal government, and Wall Street, and of course, that little bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge that brings us together. It's really a perfect place for him to speak, and we're so pleased that he is here today and really proud of the extraordinary job he is doing on our behalf. And so I'm going to ask Ross to come back up, give a little more formal introduction, but I really, again, want to reiterate how happy we are to have you all here today and look forward to the U.S. Attorney's remarks. Ross.
Anthony and I, we do this double introduction, so I don't want to go back over what he said, but I do want to say something about the Eastern District and just how powerful and important a position it is. I think back to Tom Puccio and some of the Abscan and prosecutions. My friend Andy Maloney, who was U.S. Attorney there, a terrific prosecutor, and then, of course, Loretta Lynch moving up to be Attorney General. A spectacular office with such importance to the city, and now Robert Capers is head of it. And what's interesting to me about his career is that he really is a professional prosecutor. His career has been first in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Of course, that's with Bob Morgenthau, and there's throughout the city, the legal community, nothing is a better credential than having been selected by Bob Morgenthau and then raised up in his offices, and then moving on to the Special Prosecutor's Office, a very important office and somewhat not as well known as other prosecutor offices, but one of the most important in the city, with major responsibilities and in one of the most difficult areas to prosecute. And then moving on to the Eastern District, handling important cases mentioned by Anthony, handling them well. He's 23 years now as a prosecutor. And what that tells me is the office will be well managed, and that it has as its leader a person who understands the powerful and difficult choices that prosecutors have to make and how important that position is. I liked just one little quote that he said in the FIFRA indictments in December. The newspaper article has one quote from U.S. Attorney Capers. He says, "Our work is not done." And I like that. I mean, he sees it as an ongoing process of hard work for lawyers of the Eastern District, and we welcome him and look forward to hearing his remarks here today. Welcome Robert Capers to this podium.
Good morning, folks. Thank you, Professor Sandler, and to Dean Crowell for having me here today, for the invitation, and for the wonderful introduction. One point of correction, I have 20 years as a prosecutor, but I appreciate the 23, because I think you're speaking into existence, perhaps foretelling what may happen on Election Day. So I'm going to receive that, and we're going to hear that and keep moving with that. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this wonderful event, Con Edison, Greenberg Traurig, and Verizon, and today's sponsors, Guidepost Solutions and Kostelanetz and Fink, for having me today. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge, if I could, some of my staff that got up a little earlier than usual to support me today. We watched Preet Bharara's speech and saw that it was a packed house with an overflow room. And so somebody made a joke of it today. I was afraid, because I was coming to a Southern District heavy place, that there might not have been more than 3 men in the room today for me. And so seeing as those two of those 3 men are now not in existence, I wondered who those 3 men would be. So thank you all for being here, and I want to say a special thanks to two of my executive assistant U.S. attorneys, Bill Muller and Aurelia Merchant, to my criminal chief, Jim Gatta, for coming today, and a special thank you to the U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District, Charles Dunn, who came. He always supports me, and I appreciate him being here. So I've been the U.S. Attorney for a little over 6 months now, and continue, actually last Wednesday officially made 6 months, and continue to be tremendously humbled by the honor of representing the people of the Eastern District of New York. Our district stretches, as Dean Crowell said, from right across the Manhattan or Brooklyn bridges, south to Staten Island, and all the way far east to the end, as Montauk is affectionately called. The district covers 3 of the 5 boroughs, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, in this great city. And the entire district is home to more than 8 million people who come from every walk of life, like the people in this room. People who make up the neighborhoods of some of the most diverse counties in this country. And like the people that we serve, the work of my office is equally diverse. We spend our days and our nights working to protect our nation from threats to our security, whether it's terrorism or cybercrime. We try to protect our markets and financial system from corruption and fraud, our neighborhoods from violent crime and organized crime, and our neighbors' civil rights. We also try to protect our national and our local government from greed and corruption. So over the past few months, we've done everything from announcing the first ever conviction at trial of an ISIL defendant after he attempted to travel to Syria and wage jihad. And indeed, we've successfully prosecuted more terrorism cases than any other office in this country. We've announced the conviction after guilty plea of the former highest-ranking uniformed police officer in the Suffolk County Police Department, after he admitted in court that he violated the civil rights of an in-custody prisoner and then conspired to obstruct justice by obstructing that investigation into that conduct. We also recently convicted after trial a political leader and a public servant who lined his pockets with taxpayer money that he didn't honestly earn. And just a few months ago, as was alluded to, we announced the arrest of 16 additional officials of international soccer as part of a charged 24-year racketeering conspiracy involving FIFA, as well as the guilty pleas of numerous people involved in that conspiracy. We've also seen a number of defendants from various countries be extradited to the U.S. or voluntarily come to the U.S. to appear in our court in Brooklyn. And we continue to seek others, the extradition of others from all around the globe. The diversity and the innovation of our practice has never been broader. And while we are based in Brooklyn and Long Island, the purview of the Eastern District of New York has truly become global. But this morning, I'd like to focus on something a little closer to home. I want to highlight to you some of the things that my office and I am doing to reach out to the neighborhoods that we serve. And in doing so, I ask you to consider this, as I do every day. What role must law enforcement have beyond the investigation and prosecution of those who commit crimes? How do we in law enforcement do more, to mean more, in our communities? Now, as a backdrop, as Dean Crowell said, we have the iconic Brooklyn Bridge. And for us in our office, that bridge has tremendous meaning. In fact, it's become our office symbol. We put it on the plaques that we send to our colleagues and our trial partners and our law enforcement partners to say, job well done. We actually take a physical replica of the bridge and put it on a podium, and we give it to executive members of our staff and supervisors when they leave us, okay, as a memento to them for a job well done and a reminder that the bridge that brings you to Brooklyn and brings you to what becomes home, because you spend many of your waking hours and the hours you should be sleeping there, it takes you away from us, but it always can bring you back. And that's the backdrop. And finally, for me, it's a constant reminder of the bridge that we as law enforcement must create between us and the communities that we serve. That I, as the U.S. Attorney, have a responsibility to be that bridge as the representative of the highest or the chief federal law enforcement officer for my district and the community that we serve, to be present in the community in many ways. Now, how are we trying to accomplish that? Well, in some respects, we're sticking to our traditional model. We're investigating and prosecuting the most serious crimes that affect our communities. For example, beginning last year, we saw an uptick in violent crimes in the city. And for this talk this morning, I want to focus on Brooklyn and the increase in shooting incidents that we had in Brooklyn. It seemed like for a time every day I woke up, and in particular every weekend I woke up, there were multiple shootings that occurred in Brooklyn. And I began to ask myself, and our office began to ask ourselves, what's the root of this? Well, according to the NYPD, it's gang activity. The gangs are responsible for nearly half of all the shootings in the city and the majority of shootings in Brooklyn. And these shootings stem from disputes that run the gambit, from a girl to turf to drugs to scams that people are running to try to get money instead of earning it the right way. So in order to address this, in May of last year, we began to place an added emphasis on our violent crime program with an eye toward supporting the NYPD's plan of targeted enforcement, which was focused on recidivists, violent actors, and members of gangs who are illegally carrying firearms. We began to coordinate with the police department, with our federal partners, the ATF and FBI, and our neighbors in the Brooklyn DA's office, so that we can focus on targeting and prosecuting gang members, those with violent felony convictions, those with violent proclivities. So for example, last summer we obtained an indictment charging 16 gang members with such gang-related activities as drug dealing, bank fraud, if you can believe it, robberies, and gang-related shootouts. The gangs were all associated with a crew called the Outlaw Gangster Crips, or OGC, a crew or set of the Crips street gang based in and around the East Flatbush section of Brooklyn. And in doing so, we were able to break up a conspiracy to murder 2 rival gang members before it actually happened. Also last year, we increased our overall firearms prosecutions by almost 40%, and this year are on pace for a record number of firearm prosecutions. And finally, over the past few months, we've charged over a dozen defendants in a number of extraordinarily violent multi-borough carjacking and robbery cases. You might have read about them in the papers. The goal is simple: target the most violent people in our communities, build solid cases against them, and arrest them. get them and their illegal guns off the streets, and allow the law-abiding citizens to have the quality of life that they deserve without the fear of falling victim to random acts of violence. But that's not the end of it. I spoke to you all about the bridge that we're duty-bound to build in the community and the ways that we've described in which law enforcement can do something to build these bridges. We've talked about striking at the heart of violent crimes, but aren't we obligated to do more? I say yes. What about the nonviolent first-time offenders who are arrested for some of these root crimes, like narcotics possession or distribution, or other crimes? Shouldn't they be given a second chance at living a law-abiding and productive life, free from the burden of a felony conviction or the burden of incarceration? I believe the answer is yes. And so to that end, our office supports several programs in our district that are designed to provide alternatives to incarceration for people charged with certain crimes. For example, the Pretrial Opportunity or POP program is a drug court that was established in 2012 to work with drug-addicted defendants to increase the probability of successful drug treatment and reduce recidivism. The Special Options Service, or SOS program, which was established 15 years ago, provides intensive supervision, job training, and counseling to certain young men and women aged 18 to 25 who are arrested for nonviolent federal crimes. My office and I am fully supportive of and participate in these programs. We've seen dozens of these defendants enter into these programs battling severe addictions, unstable home lives, and a lack of education or employment options. But these programs provide these folks with an opportunity to turn their lives around. And for a few of the most successful participants, we've agreed to reduce criminal charges or enter into deferred prosecution agreements for them. We support these programs because they further our mission by reducing recidivism among the population and making good on our commitment to ensure that justice is served. It also allows us to send back to the community productive members of society who are committed to leading a law-abiding life. And what of the offender who's just been sentenced to a term of incarceration, completed it, and is returning to the community, as we like to say, as a returned citizen? Aren't we obligated to provide them with a support network that increases their chances of returning to the community and being productive and law-abiding members of the community who don't reoffend? I believe the answer, of course, is yes. And as my predecessor, U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch recently said, prosecution is only one aspect of a comprehensive justice system. Nearly every person behind bars will one day come home. And in order to truly make our community safer, we must make sure that people who have served their time are able to fully and productively engage in our society, whether through education or employment or some other constructive means. Now, the issue of reentry, and this being reentry week for our department, is a pressing one for our district. On average, every year, more than 1,400 federal inmates are released from prison to be supervised in the Eastern District of New York. And right now, there are more than 3,000 former federal inmates under supervision in our district. In addition, there are nearly 11,000 former state inmates on parole in our district. These men and women face a variety of challenges when they return to the communities. They may not have a job. They may not have money or a place to live. They find themselves facing the same pressures and temptations that landed them in prison in the first place. So assisting these returning citizens in finding and keeping employment, as well as housing and mentorship, is critical to the successful reentry into our communities. So what are we doing about this? We're working with our local business communities to draw attention to this critical issue. And as you may or may not be aware, in April, earlier this month, on April 11th, President Obama and Attorney General Lynch hosted 19 companies at the White House for the signing of the Fair Chance Business Pledge. Those companies included such giants as Coke and Pepsi and Google and Facebook and American Airlines and Starbucks and many others. And they pledged to eliminate employment barriers for those with criminal records and create a clear pathway to employment, a clear pathway to a second chance. Now, my office is taking this message to the local business leaders. So next week, on May 5th, I'm meeting with representatives from local chambers of commerce to continue this conversation. Now, to be clear, there's certainly a moral element to this that I'm going to push to them, that we as a society have, to treat these folks who have paid their debt to society with fairness and honesty. But the focus of my message is also going to be to these chambers of commerce that these individuals not only deserve a second chance, but it's to their benefit. There are certain tax incentives, and they have thousands of people who are productive and eager to work and ready for a second chance. So I'm going to ask them not to assume that this is an act of charity, that this is good business. You got people with skills, people with a desire to work, who are ready and willing to do that. Now, for those returning citizens that might have had an underlying drug addiction that was the root cause of their criminal conduct, our office supports a program called Supervision to Aid Reentry, or STAR Court, which is a post-sentence drug court run by our district court that provides intensive supervision to ex-offenders with documented histories of substance abuse. The court helps these individuals to reenter the community after completing their terms of imprisonment, provides them help and support and guidance as they move on and past their terms of incarceration. And what of the violent ex-offender who has completed his sentence and is returning to the community, and the law of violent gangs and activity that helped bring him there in the first place? Well, my office supports and we participate in a program spearheaded by NYPD Commissioner of Collaborative Policing, Susan Herman, called Operation Ceasefire. Now that program is directed at 10 precincts in Brooklyn, and these precincts have the greatest concentration of gang activity in the district. And the program is modeled after a group violence intervention model developed by Professor David Kennedy of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And in Operation Ceasefire, on a quarterly basis, we, along with a collection of our local and federal law enforcement partners, participate in sit-down meetings with these members of these crews and gangs that are still on parole or supervised release. And we tell them the truth, that we want to help them, that we want to keep them alive and out of prison. And we emphasize to them that it's ultimately up to them to stop the cycle of violence. We remind them of the consequences of continued gang activity, and that's death or sure incarceration. We give them a real dose of tough love. We also invite in community members and neighborhood leaders to provide them with information about the resources available and to help them move away from gang life and earn a legitimate day's pay. But I ask myself the question, is that enough? And the answer is I don't think so. You see, as the son and the twin brother of retired NYPD detectives, I learned early on that to solve a problem, you got to get in front of it early and often. And by that, I literally mean seeing the problem on the horizon and getting in front of it before it presents itself in an effort to prevent the problem from actually happening. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me tell you a little story. Back in 2014, I participated in the corruption trial of William Boylan Jr., the now former New York State Assemblyman from Brooklyn's 55th Assembly District. Boylan's family was dubbed the Kennedys of Brownville once by the New York Times. And Brownsville is one of the several neighborhoods that make up the 55th Assembly District. But because the Boylans were from Brownsville, it became the hub of that Assembly District. And Boylan, his father, his uncle, and his sister at various times, because of their clout, were all elected officials from that community. Well, ultimately, we convicted Boylan of all 21 counts of an indictment, charging him with bribery, extortion, and other related crimes. And late last year, he was sentenced to 14 years in jail. But while I was preparing for that trial, I got to see for myself how greatly underserved the people of Brownsville were and how they suffered because of his greed and the lack of care and apathy, frankly. Of particular note to me were the preteens and the teenagers from Brownsville who had very few services that could help steer them away from the lure of gang activity and violence. And in the months after the Boylan trial ended, I came across a New York Times Magazine article written by a reporter named Mosey Secret, entitled "On the Brink in Brownsville." The article chronicled the experiences of teenage boys and girls in that neighborhood and detailed their struggles as they faced poverty head-on. A violent crime rate that was punctuated by 72 shootings and 15 murders in the preceding year. And we're talking about Brownsville, which is 2 square miles. Okay? This is an area saturated with gang activity, with no visible programming and no visible alternatives for them other than hanging on the streets. And the article spoke about the dark corners of Brownsville and observed that many dreams of getting ahead and out of the neighborhood could never be realized. And so I began to wonder, what else could I and my office do to build a bridge to that community, to help a generation of kids on the front end before they had those life-altering contacts with the criminal justice system? And the answer came to me this past February when I was able to develop a relationship with a dynamic young educator and principal named Nadia Lopez, who is the founder of a school called the Mott Hall Bridges Academy in Brownsville, ironically, just a block over from Thomas S. Boylan Street, which is named after William Boylan's uncle. Now, Mott Hall Bridges Academy is a New York City Department of Education public middle school that's staffed by wonderfully committed teachers and paraprofessionals who every day take on the struggle of lifting up these kids and educating them. Kids who are already feeling the tremendous weight that disenfranchisement places on them. Every school day, these dedicated professionals try to strip away that weight, encourage them, educate them, and send them back out into the world, hopefully a little stronger and able to return back to school the next day. We're talking about kids who can't come to school because at the beginning and the end of school day, gangs line up on the 4 corners and wait for them. Because if they won't join them, they'll beat them up. We're talking about a 13-year-old boy who I met who was still recovering from a fractured orbital socket from where he was repeatedly kicked in the face with Timberland boots because he refused to join the crew. We're talking about parents who won't let their kids come to school because of this. So what do I do there? Well, I do what they ask me to. I try to become a presence in the school. I attend on occasion, and I meet with groups of students in an attempt to establish a bond with them as someone who looks like them, a person of color, who has reached one of the pinnacles of law enforcement in this great city. Quite simply, I try to encourage them. I try to help educate them. I try to mentor them. I introduce them to other high-ranking federal law enforcement officials of color in this city, like the special agent in charge of the ATF for New York, the associate special agent in charge of the DEA in New York, and the special agent in charge of the IRS in New York. And with every one of these folks that I introduce them to, I try to tear down the misconception that law enforcement is simply here to arrest them and warehouse them. I also try to encourage them that they too, with hard work and right choices, can be on this side of the law and reach the highest levels. We also plan to have a group of students from the Academy visit our office this summer for a one-day internship. They'll have the opportunity to meet other AUSAs, visit the district courthouse and meet with the judges. They'll get a chance to meet with the U.S. Marshal and with federal probation. And why is that? To let them know that participation in the system on this side, on the front end of it, and at the highest levels is attainable. Now, there are those that believe that the role of law enforcement is to enforce the law without fear and favor. In short, to hold people accountable if they break the law. However, as society continues to evolve, what's clear is that law enforcement's role must evolve as well. We absolutely must embrace the pivotal role that we play in today's society. We not only enforce the law without fear and favor, but we do so with compassion. We show compassion by, among other things, building strong and sustainable bridges to the communities that we serve. And in building those bridges, we embrace the tenet that many of those who commit crimes and pay their debt to society are deserving of a second chance, with every opportunity at their disposal to succeed. That some of those who commit those crimes under extenuating circumstances and who demonstrate a commitment to straightening out their lives deserve that second chance without paying that heavy debt. And finally, that we have a duty to reach out to the community in an effort to get in front of those who can be steered back onto a clear path before they commit crimes. It's these bridges that my office, that I am committed to building with the community that we serve, that we are sworn to protect. Thank you for this morning. Thank you for having me this morning. I appreciate it.
That was a terrific talk. I must say, it just absolutely broadened my mind and thoughts about the prosecution office and the U.S. Attorney's Office. And really, thank you for sharing such profound and wonderful and thoughts about what prosecution office could be and ought to be. It was very moving, and I really appreciate those comments. Open up we have our open microphones, and I'd like to bring first the two special sponsors. Ask Bart Schwartz, and is it Claude? Claude Millman where's Claude? Brian, okay. What we do is we do ask the people who've been the special sponsors of the BREC to make the first comments or ask first questions. And so I invite them, and first Bart Schwartz from Guidepost Solutions.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say how proud Guidepost Solutions has always been to support these programs, and after hearing your remarks today, I'm even more proud to be part of it.
Thank you.
I'm also a former federal prosecutor from the other side of the bridge. And,
Seems to be a lot of that here.
and in the years since I left the office, and really most recently, probably the last 5 years, I've been active pro bono in the world of human trafficking and working with various organizations. And I'm wondering if there are any special programs or initiatives that the Department of Justice has or locally, or what you're seeing that you can talk about in that area, and how private citizens can help prevent it and identify it.
Well, thank you for the question. Yes, there are, as you well know, human trafficking is one of Attorney General Lynch's several priorities that she has for the department. In our office, we certainly make it a priority. We have a civil rights unit that is staffed by a chief. Her name is Taryn Merkel. And what she does is she liaisons extensively with law enforcement, but more importantly, with non-governmental entities and nonprofits who work to target and eradicate human trafficking locally. For us, a lot of human trafficking involves our illicit prostitution rings that target our young girls and lure them into those activities. So there are a number of those agencies. I don't have the names in front of me, but what I can tell you is private citizens can certainly reach out to us at the U.S. Attorney's Office at 718-254-7000 and ask for Taryn Merkel. We are working with the FBI and HSI, Customs and Border Protection, to investigate and prosecute those cases, and work extensively also with the NYPD and the state police. Please do. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir.
Hi, good morning.
And remember, you said you were going to be nice to me.
I'm gonna try my best to be nice to you.
Okay.
I just echo everyone's thanks for your insightful comments this morning. And my question is about sentencing, and specifically the Eastern District bench. The judges of the Eastern District have emerged in recent years as kind of vocal advocates for sentencing reform. I'm thinking specifically about a judge like Judge Gleeson, who recently left the bench, but before he did, was becoming somewhat called a maverick. And I was wondering if the views and the talks and the advocacy for sentencing reform that you're hearing from the Eastern District bench has influenced your office when charging decisions or the positions assistants are taking at sentencing hearings.
I mean, it has, but I'd like to think that our office has been, kind of very reasonable. Right? We try to deal in what's just or not. And with, in 2005, when the guidelines became not mandatory, I think it opened up a lot of space for us to kind of advocate for and fashion more reasonable sentencing. We're not in the business of just wanting to warehouse people. So we hear what the bench is saying, but we in our office have been endeavoring for many years now to try to do our best to provide alternatives to incarceration, but also if there are sentences that need to be imposed, to make sure that they are proportionate with the crime that was committed.
Yes, good morning. My name is Alan Roscoff, and I co-authored the nation's first gay rights bill. And my question would be brief. With the support of the New York Times and its editorial and the American Civil Liberties Union, Congress members Jerry Nadler and Sean Patrick Maloney and 5 gay and lesbian members of the New York City Council sent you letters regarding your homophobic persecution and prosecution of rentboy.com. You're known throughout the gay community as a major homophobe because of this, and I think it's outrageous. I want to hear how you could possibly defend our right to have sex and all the gains we've made over the years when other people in your position refused to take the case. They had to shop it around.
Okay, that's a question.
Okay, that's my question. How do you deal with being such an outrageous homophobe?
I don't know if I know how to answer that question because I'm not a homophobe, sir.
You disagree.
Well, you don't know me, so we can agree to disagree, and we'll leave it at that.
Mr. Capers, my name is Richard Luthman. I'm an attorney. You have the unenviable task of succeeding a very effective and excellent U.S. attorney, who's now the Attorney General, who really part of the business of the prosecutions of the Eastern District always has been career criminals, organized crime. How does your office deal with unexpected administrative and resource issues such as the Welsh case, which is going to probably create a flood of resentencing and a lot more resources to be committed to that, and balance that with the detailed agenda that you provided today in other non-administrative and prosecutorial issues?
So a couple of things. First, it's not the unenviable task. This is the opportunity of a lifetime to succeed Loretta, who I love and adore and respect more than anything in the world. So I just want to put that out there. And boss, I hope that you're seeing this somewhere.
Look into the camera.
And to answer the second part of your question, we just do. Listen, we are the government. We are in the mode of doing a lot with very little. We make the most out of our people and the resources that we have. If it becomes more taxing than we imagine, which it never will be, we'll ask for more resources. But when you come into this life as a government employee, you learn to do a lot with very little and become effective. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, good morning. I'm going to withhold my name. It's because the issues are very delicate. And I'm just basically asking you for a plea for help, not for me as someone with HIV, but it's for all the HIVers in New York. I do not know if it is a situation for all HIVers, but for my family and myself, I am being basically harassed. And I sense it's there are some sort of powerful people involved and some sort of government people involved, and my families are involved in it.
May I ask you to ask a question or make a quick comment? We have other people who would like to speak.
Yeah, I understand. That's why I said I would just, I'm asking him. It's more or less a comment than a questions. I would like your office to basically, someone who's HIV and disabled, I'm caring for mentally ill, disabled siblings. And I can sense how that easily, right now, they're protected by myself and my family who are providing for them. So if I passed away, my parents passed away, I'm very concerned they may fall away on trafficking. Okay, I'm coming to conclusions. I'm leaving now.
Okay, so ma'am, let me pose a question for you
Okay.
and answer it for you. Can you help me? The answer is I'm not sure, but what we can do is we can look into your claim. So you could contact our office. We have operators who you can voice your concerns to, and they will direct you to somebody who will take your complaint down, and we will investigate it. And to the extent that there is a federal law that is implicated, then perhaps we can.
Those is sure very difficult. It's not easily be able to talk for other people.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Sir.
Robert, as a favor to me, please help me seek justice for Lakai Livingston, who died inside 120 Sherman Street under 3 years ago.
What would you like me to do, sir?
I'll contact you.
Well, you can contact my office.
Yes, I'll contact you.
But if it's a crime that has been committed, that is a local crime, it would start with the police department and then work its way from the police department through us or the appropriate prosecuting agency. Okay?
Not a problem.
All right. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Russell Brandom. I'm a reporter with TheVerge.com. So I had a question about the encryption issue. Your office has just finished up a major encryption case. We saw another one taking place in California. Both cases came to a close not because of legal issues, but because of a breakthrough in sort of the investigations at the center, but that's left some of the larger legal issues unresolved from many people's perspectives. So I'm curious sort of what you've taken from it, and if you think U.S. attorneys in general still have an appetite for this kind of case.
Well, I can't really comment specifically on that. There are issues that are well known that were briefed by my office that came to a conclusion, as you well know, because there was an advance in the case, and we promptly notified Judge Brody, and Judge Brody at that point denied our petition as moot. Should there be the occasion for that to arise again, I am sure that somebody within the department will address it.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hello.
You've served in both state courts and in federal courts.
Yes, sir.
And I often wonder, why is it that almost all the wrongful conviction cases that you see come out of state courts? You almost never hear about a wrongful conviction in federal court. And it can't be because of the character or content or nature of the people. There are people of goodwill in both offices. So it says to me that there's something systemic in the way cases are processed or the laws or something that's different. And having been in both, can you think of some systemic, not a question based on the character of the people, because there are good people in both offices, but something systemic that's different in the two offices and the way cases are handled?
I can't point to anything. That's the short answer. I mean, listen, the system is imperfect because the system, like everything else, is engaged in and run by people, and people make mistakes. The beauty of the system is that there are checks and balances that are in place, that if there are mistakes that are made, hopefully they can be found and corrected. No, I won't call it luck, sir.
Martin Hallwall. Good morning, sir. Thank you for coming.
Good morning, sir.
I have a question about the flexibility in the United States sentencing guidelines. I worked as a paralegal in a defense in a federal matter. I ended up writing a leniency letter. The judge declared a downwards modification from the bench on the grounds of specific deterrence and general deterrence being served by a reduced sentence. Can you make comments about the restrictions that the guidelines impose on your office, or how they help or hinder your office? Thank you.
Well, that's a pretty broad question. I can tell you that the guidelines are no longer mandatory. So to the extent that there are restrictions, there really are not. They now function as a guidepost from which we and the court considers what the appropriate guideline range is, and then takes into account, as you referenced, the 18 U.S.C. 3553 factors that they are duty-bound to consider in fashioning a reasonable sentence. To the extent that you cite restrictions, I think the Supreme Court is taking many of those away.
Hi, Mr. Capers.
Yes, sir.
I'm Brian Logan. I'm an attorney here in Manhattan, and my brother Bruce and I also come from a family of cops.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning. The question I have is, there's been a recent spate of scams targeting senior citizens, IRS, psychics, et cetera, in the outer boroughs as well as Long Island. What is your office doing to prosecute such crimes against the elderly?
Well, as you well know, those types of scams are difficult to investigate and prosecute. We are actively looking into those and investigating them, but as you well know, many of those scams take place outside of the country, where mailings or phone calls and so on and so forth are made, scrambled, and have to be tracked. And so to the extent that we are investigating them, we remain vigilant, but we remind ourselves, or we are reminded how difficult they are. What we also do is try to engage in education. And to that end, I know that local law enforcement is doing its best to advise people. And indeed, there has been newspaper and coverage on news outlets to warn those people who are most vulnerable about those types of schemes. So it's a combination of education and investigation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Glenn Newman from Greenberg Traurig,
Yes, sir.
one of the sponsors. But I had a question. Your district includes 3 significant airports, Kennedy, LaGuardia, and MacArthur.
Yes.
Are there unique issues or concerns that you have? I'm not sure if there's any other district in the country that has 3 major airports in it. Are there difficult or issues that you have to deal with respect to that? And have you looked at airports as an issue or as something to make sure that whatever good things are happening at Kennedy happen at LaGuardia or happen at MacArthur?
Well, we investigate and prosecute crimes, and so what we do is we coordinate with our partners, including the FAA, the DEA, and HSI, who have enforcement responsibilities there on the federal level, and the Port Authority, who has it on the local level. There are many attendant concerns that we have with the importation and transportation of narcotics and other contraband. What we continually do is we monitor, we enforce, we coordinate, we share information, we educate ourselves so that we could do what we can to best address the issues that come up. We also seek advice from the community. If you see something, say something. Tell us something. All of those things. Yes, sir.
Joe Friendly, TV producer. If there were to be a high court ruling that the marijuana laws were unconstitutional as encroaching upon constitutionally protected rights of liberty, pursuit of happiness, even freedom of thought, without a compelling state interest, the state's interest mainly being politics, not science, would that be helpful?
I should ask you that question.
Seeing any more questions, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to come back to the things you were saying in your talk about dealing with gangs, the resources that you need to not only prosecute, but then to help in reentry. I wonder if you just expand a bit on those comments. What kind of resources do you need? What kind of things are you doing in the field? And what more things perhaps even a law school or lawyers could do to help?
Sure. Well, I mean, listen, we're talking about the federal government, and so we know that resources are scarce. And so what we have done is try to partner with our state and local partners and who have connections with non-for-profits and other agencies so that we can try to have different outreach opportunities, whether it's job readiness. We are also, we hope, partnering with some of the 5 district attorneys. So, for example, in Brownsville and some of those other attendant areas, we can open up centers on the weekends, in the evenings, so that we can provide safe places that have sports and academic and social workers on staff who can kind of get these kids off the street at those critical hours where the damage can be done. So what can you do? You can help us. You can partner with us. You can help expose us to people who have connections and resources that will help us to brainstorm and help to affect some of this program. This responsibility that I think that law enforcement has, I believe that we all have if we want to promote a more perfect union and a place that's safer for all of us.
Well, let's bring this breakfast to a close. I want to thank Robert Capers for a really, for me, a stimulating talk, eye-opening in many ways. Those of us who had the honor of being prosecutors many years ago, I don't remember that we thought much about these things. And it's wonderful to hear the breadth of interests and the knowledge that the prosecutor's role is just a piece in a larger puzzle. And what we heard today is that at least this U.S. attorney sees the entire puzzle and is thinking about that. And I think that's extraordinary and an important lesson for all of us today. So we thank you for that lesson, and as we always do. We'd like to give a book of some kind related to our law school to our speakers, and I was thinking about this. Now, here's a man who's been a prosecutor, U.S. Attorney, Chief Prosecutor for 6 months. I thought, well, let's go back in time and produce a book for him about the man who rode the tiger, Samuel Seabury, a graduate of this law school in our 125th year. This is a great read about how prosecutors can make a major difference in the political and the governmental and the civic world. And I give it to Robert Capers with thanks for a wonderful morning. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Our next breakfast will be on May 26th, the Civic Fame Breakfast. And then we have an Ethics CLE on May 17th. See you in May.